a beautiful tradition. The
Yeah.
pomp, the ceremony, and it's one of the highlights of the legislative calendar.
Yep.
So, yes, we're
Yeah.
glad to have the people joining with us today.
Yeah, and we will explain certain matters of protocol as we proceed to start the commentary before all the members should be at the Senate. The members are in the Senate chambers. They're right across the hall from us, and they are assembled. All the members of the House of Assembly have assembled,
Mhm.
and the procedures will begin. We'll explain some matters of protocol.
Yes, we will.
Start
Yes,
off with
we will.
you, Heather.
Sometimes the members of the Senate are also referred to as the upper house, and the members of the House of Assembly are also referred to as the lower house. And as you said, they're scheduled to come down to Cabinet grounds momentarily. They're gathered in their respective chambers. The House of Assembly is gathered at Veritas Place, and the Senate are gathered. The government is led by Bermuda's Premier, the Honorable David E. Burt, JP, MP, and the opposition is led by Mr. Jarian Richardson of the One Bermuda Alliance. Folks will have a chance to witness history, as you pointed out, Tina, and tradition that have been interwoven into our Constitution, our island. And as the ceremony unfolds, we'll explain some of the landmarks that bear witness to Bermuda's political evolution and development. And we will attempt to interweave aspects of Bermuda's uh, political development as we commentate on this very formal occasion. As most people know, Bermuda has progressed politically, and now we are a self governing territory with control over most of our internal affairs. We've reached the position primarily as a result of the constitutional order that was established in 1968. We will share with you the significant changes resulting from that document. The constitutional order by which Bermuda is governed sets out the composition of the legislature. It states that the legislature of Bermuda, and I quote from that document, shall consist of Her Majesty, a Senate, and a House of Assembly. And as I already indicated, the Senate is also referred to as the upper house. And the members of the House of Assembly are also referred to as the lower house.
Yep. The convening or the coming together of those elected and appointed to discuss and deliberate on matters on behalf of the welfare of the people can be traced back to Bermuda's earliest beginnings. Bermuda's legislative body is the oldest in the Commonwealth outside of the British Isles, and it dates back to the 1st of August, 1620, when then Governor Nathaniel Butler summoned a General Assembly to meet at St. Peter's Church in St. George's. The General Assembly comprised of the Governor Butler, his council, and two male representatives from each of the 8 tribes, which are now designated as parishes, and there's 9. As the colony had been divided back then, at the first meeting of Bermuda's General Assembly, Governor Butler advised the representatives of the following, and here's a quote: "We come not for ourselves only, or any man's in particular, but to serve and regard the public. We are therefore rid ourselves from all desires of gain. We are to despise all personal interests." Well, that charge from 1620 is still fitting and relevant today.
It is,
The
isn't it?
appointed and the elected should refrain from desires of gain and despise all personal interests.
How appropriate, isn't it?
Yeah, even for today,
Even for
absolutely.
today.
And it is in that spirit, and of course, time honored practice, that our legislature convenes today to embark on the upcoming legislative year. The government is led by the Progressive Labor Party, whilst the One Bermuda Alliance forms the opposition.
And you know, Tina, our listening audience may be interested to know that prior to 1999, the convening ceremony took place in the Senate chambers.
Very small.
Very small, so public was not invited. Since then, with the exception of 2020, when the ceremony took place in St. George's, The proceedings have been held on the cabinet grounds so that the public may watch and may attend. This change was introduced by the Progressive Labor Party. Many of you may recall that in 2020, the convening of Bermuda's legislature took place in our lovely and historic town of St. George, also a World Heritage Site, because in 2020, Bermuda was celebrating the 400th anniversary of the first meeting of Bermuda's General Assembly. And in 1620, that body had met in St. George's, St. Peter's Church, to be more specific.
Our House of Assembly is actually, as we said before, the lower house of the legislatures. Members are elected, and I see some members, some former members. I think I saw Mr. Lister. I'm looking on my, yes, I do believe so. Some former members, they're elected during the general election to this august body. The most recent general election occurred in October of 2020 when the Progressive Labor Party, led by Bermuda's youngest premier, then the Honorable E. David Burke, was returned to power, having won 30 of the 36 seats. Thus, the current government is led by the Progressive Labor Party. Now, earlier we drew reference to Bermuda's political evolution, which is attributable to, in a large part, to the constitutional order introduced in the historic constitutional order introduced in 1968. We should also point out that there were key figures who, without fear, challenged the status quo. For example, the evolution of the franchise is the result of persons who questioned and challenged the status quo of the time and sought to make Bermuda a more just and inclusive society. We're talking 1968. Okay.
Yes, and there was a group, the Women's Suffrage Society.
I was
They were part of challenging the status quo at the time.
That would have been earlier, though,
That
right?
would
Yeah,
have been
yeah,
earlier.
yeah.
That would have been earlier. So the right to vote has not always been afforded to all Bermudians 18 years of age and older, and we sometimes assume that that's the case. This democratic right has come as a result of the resilience, the persistence, and challenge by certain people who would not accept the status quo from the 1600s. And so, because back then in 1789, only males who owned land, and the land had to be valued at 24 pounds, were eligible to vote. Political candidates had to own land valued at 120 pounds. This had the effect of excluding many from the political process, rendering many people voiceless. Property owning women finally won the right to vote in 1944. This was a direct result of the actions and persistence of the Bermuda Women's Suffragette Society, an organization that was first formed in 1923. Do you know that one of our national heroes, Gladys Mizik Morel,
Yes.
she was a part of that movement pushing for women to have the right to vote? But I should point out that the property requirements had the effect still of disenfranchising the majority of the black people. You know, it's noteworthy that after emancipation, which did occur in 1833, the land requirements were raised significantly, such that only males who owned land worth 60 pounds or more were eligible to vote. And to be a political candidate, a male had to own property valued at 240 pounds. This, therefore, excluded still many from voting or running as a candidate in any elections. This state of affairs did not change until the middle of the 20th century.
Yes, and I see Black Rod has taken up his position. Black Rod is Chief Inspector Kieran Evans,
Mhm.
and he will be dispatched after the governor arrives to go up to the house, Sessions House, and there he'll knock on the door, and then he will be admitted, and then he will ask that the members of the house convene and come down to the lawn. So Black Rod is in place, always a dashing figure, isn't it?
Always a
Always, always,
dashing
always
figure.
part
The
of the.
attire, the
Mhm.
uniform. Yes.
Yes. Another challenge, you spoke about the challenge of women's right to vote.
Hmm.
And the other challenge to Bermuda's political system was launched in 1960. So
Hmm.
this is before the constitutional change,
Yes.
okay? By a committee for universal adult suffrage
Hmm.
formed by Paulu Karamafega, then known as Roosevelt Brown,
Hmm.
or affectionately to me, Uncle Ruse,
Hmm.
to challenge Bermuda's undemocratic voting system. Bermuda witnessed a political watershed in 1963, just a year after I was born, when the Parliamentary Election Act allowed every Bermudian 25 years or older to have the right to vote. Further political developments occurred in 1966 when the voting age was lowered to 21 years and the property vote was withdrawn. Then, near the end of the 20th century, in 1990, the voting age was lowered to 18 years.
Thank you for sharing when you first arrived on the scene,
Yeah,
Tina.
it's okay. I'm proud of it. I'm
I
very
know you
proud.
are.
Takes a while to get to 61, okay?
It sure
You
does.
learn a lot.
And you look fabulous. Anyway, let's continue with our commentary. A further major political development occurred when a constitutional conference took place in 1966, and this led to the constitutional order. The participants included representatives from the Progressive Labor Party, which was Bermuda's first political party, established in 1963, and the participants also from the United Bermuda Party, which was established a year later in 1964. As well, there were independents that took part in this constitutional conference. This conference produced a new constitution for Bermuda that came into effect June 8th, 1968. And under that new constitution, Parliament was convened on June 14th, 1968. Some have referred to the Constitution as the internal self government form because it gave responsibility for domestic affairs such as education, health, transportation, finance, public works, immigration, gave all those areas of responsibility to the local government, whilst the governor, as we have referred to her, Her Excellency, the Honorable Rena Lauji, retains control of external affairs, defense, internal security, and the police. I may pause here, Tina. I see that the permanent secretaries have just walked in. They've been led in by the new head of the public service, Mrs. Sherry Witter.
Welcome. As a result of the constitutional order, and I was just looking to see if Black Rod was dispatched yet, but no, he hasn't been. As a result of the constitutional order held at the board camp in 1979, now this is 1979.
This is a different
Yeah,
meeting,
yeah.
yes.
The designations of the executive council and the legislative council changed to cabinet and senate, respectively.
Mhm.
The constitutional conference that took place in 1979 also brought about other changes. It provided that elected members of parliament were now referred to as MPs, an abbreviation for members of parliament. Previously, they were referred to as members of the colonial parliament, MCPs. Uh, and then the change charge became the executive council became the cabinet, thus continuing the evolution of the parliament. And I see the arrival of the justices. Uh,
Ms.
always great
Shade,
to see.
they look splendid in their robes. Mrs. Shade Subert Williams, Mrs. Stoneham. Behind those two ladies is Mr. Larry Mussenden.
Queenie Justice Sade Sabir Williams, Queenie Justice Nicole Stoneham, Queenie Justice Larry Mussenden as well, and the members of the magistrates as
Mhm.
well. We're delighted to have the justices here with us. At Her Excellency, when Her Excellency, Mrs. Rena Langley,
Mrs. Rita Lauji,
Lousy.
Her
I went to,
Excellency the Governor.
I went back to one of the older previous governors'
Yes, I
language. I
know.
did. I just did that. Slip
That's
that.
okay.
That was a slip.
We apologize
When
for that
she
slip.
arrives at the cabinet on the southwest gate, we're going to ask for everyone to stand at the arrival of Her Excellency the Governor, and remain standing while the national anthem is played. Her Excellency the Governor will come from the landau. She will go to the front steps of the cabinet office. She'll be met by the commanding officer of the Royal Bermuda Regiment. And as the motorcade moves off, the national anthem is played. So we're asking everyone to please stand for the arrival of the governor. Following that, two members of the House of Assembly, Ms. Susan Jackson and Mr. Christopher Famous, will deliver a message to the member of Her Excellency the Governor's staff at the Reed Street entrance of the Cabinet Building and return to the House of Assembly at Veritas Place with a message from Her Excellency the Governor. Her Excellency the Governor will then dispatch Black Rod, Chief Inspector Kewin Evans, and he will summon the House of Assembly to the Cabinet Office, and that is what will be taking place within the next few minutes once she arrives as well.
Mhm. And while we wait for the arrival of Her Excellency the Governor, our listening audience may find it interesting to know just a little bit about some aspects of parliamentary etiquette. For example, there's a parliamentary rule that states that, and I quote, it should be out of order for members of parliament to use offensive and insulting language about other members of parliament, or language that is in bad taste and brings the House into disrepute. There is another rule as well which stipulates no member shall be referred to by name only. The standard practice is to refer to the members as the honorable member from and name the constituency. And people may wonder, Tina, who ensures that these rules are followed? That is the responsibility of the Speaker of the House of Assembly and the President of the Senate.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, the President of the Senate, I'd like to highlight a few differences between the President of the Senate
Mhm,
and that of the Speaker of the House of Assembly.
mhm.
Namely, the President of the Senate is recruited from amongst the ranks of the independent senators, and the President of the Senate may also participate in debates and has the right to an original vote. That is to say that the President gets to vote immediately on any matter that is being discussed in the Senate, rather than only voting in the event of a tie.
Mhm.
Whereas the Speaker of the House of Assembly is not entitled to participate in debates in the House of Assembly and can only cast a vote in the event of a tie. The underlying principle here is that the Speaker's casting votes should be used in such a way to permit further discussion on the issue on which a vote has been taken.
That is interesting.
Hmm.
And
Speaking of the House,
speaking of the House and the
yeah,
Speaker, there was a time that we thought that the Speaker of the House came from the ruling party.
yes.
But the Speaker of the House is chosen by the ruling party, but it can come from either the opposition or the ruling party. That distinction was clarified
Not too,
for us not too long ago.
yeah. And it actually happened
It did.
several years ago,
Can
a
you
couple of years ago.
can you tell us
Yeah, I
what
do
that
believe
was?
so.
Yes.
I can't remember the years, but I
Mhm.
do believe it was the speaker came from the ranks. The ruling party was the One Bermuda Alliance, and the speaker came from the ranks of the Progressive Labor Party.
Yes.
Yes, so that was just several years ago, not too long ago. Um, as we said before, we are waiting the arrival. Oh, we having the members of the
The members of the Senate
Senate.
are now about to come out of Cabinet building.
So they have been meeting upstairs.
Mhm.
Members of the Senate, the independent senators, Senator John White, Senator Kieran Bell, government senators, Owen Darrell, Ariana Hudson, Senator Lindsay Simmons, Senator Reverend Emily Gail Dill.
I don't believe she's here today.
No, I do believe she's absent today, but Senator Leslie Robinson as well. But right now, we're
Senator
waiting the arrival.
offer
The
as
opposition senators are Senator Robin Tucker, Senator Dr. Douglas DeCudo, and Senator Dwayne Robinson.
we should point out that Senator Leslie Clark Robinson is the newest member of the Senate.
Yes.
And so this is her first occasion.
Is she? Did she come
Yes.
be Senator Dwayne?
And
thought-
Senator Dwayne.
Yeah.
Yes.
The
Did you say that Senator Robin Tucker is now the opposition leader in the Senate?
government leader for
Government leader.
the, no, opposition leader.
Opposition
Sorry.
leader, yeah.
The government leader for the Senate is Senator Owen Darrell,
Darrell.
the Honorable Owen Darrell.
Yes. He's also the Minister for Culture and Sport. So the senators are taking their seats. And
Good
here, the arrival of Her Excellency the Governor, Rena Lauji.
She is being met at the door by the President, President of the Senate, the Honorable Joan E. Dillis Wright. The governor has dispatched Black Rod. She's dispatched him and using the words, Gentleman Usher of the Black Rod, I command you to inform the Speaker of the House of Assembly that I request the presence of his honorable house forthwith.
Yes.
So he will go up and tap on the door
Door?
and express the sentiments of the governor, the requests of the governor, and Her Excellency will then retire to the Cabinet building. And you, of course, may all be seated. The commanding officer will then bring the President of the Senate out to the Cabinet office lawn, and followed by Her Excellency. Once the acknowledges Her Excellency, will then the members of the House of Assembly will assemble on the Cabinet lawn. So Black Rod has been dispatched. And again, we thank you all who braved the weather, those of you that came, that were invited to come on this, the convening of the legislature. We are delighted that you are here and pleased that you braved the Bermuda weather. And as we said, one of the coldest days in Bermuda thus
So
far.
far.
So far.
Well, it is November. So.
Yeah, it is. It's fun. Finally,
Yes.
a break in the heat.
Yeah.
Some interesting things to note
Mhm.
this this year. Um, I
Well,
think
if I could just share a
hmm
little bit about Her Excellency. Probably people know this already now because she's been with us for over a year. But she brings a wealth of knowledge and a breadth of experience, having worked in various UK departments prior to being appointed as governor. Her Excellency had been the director at HM Treasury, where she was responsible for implementing and enforcing financial sanctions. Her previous experience includes drug policy, public spending, regulatory policy, internal trade, economic growth, and national security. So those are a few things to share about our governor, Her
hmm
Excellency.
And there have been, as you mentioned, some changes in the Senate this year. Of
Mhm.
course, um, pretty much the changes in the Senate, we recognize the Senator Leslie Robinson and Dwayne Robinson as well.
Mhm.
Um, but just out of an interesting note, I always
Mhm.
find this interesting, the
Mhm.
House of Assembly. There are some family connections associated that we always like to bring this up.
Mhm.
I do.
Mhm.
To our listening and viewing audience, there have been uncles and nephews who sat in the House of Assembly at the same time or have followed each other. There have been many cousins who, e- as the deputy speaker of the House would say, cousin,
Cousin. He claims everybody
it's
as
a
his
cousin.
cousin.
There have been many cousins who have
Mhm.
sat in the House either on the same side of
Mhm.
the House
Mhm.
or on the opposite sides of
Mhm.
the House.
Mhm. Mhm.
And there was also a father and daughter who sat in the House Assembly at the same time.
Yeah, very interesting dynamics.
And currently, there's a father and son who sit in the House of Assembly. It could be say that family dynamics, politics runs in the blood.
It runs in the blood.
So now everyone's trying to figure out the father and
And
the
son,
daughter, and the father and
father
the
and the
son.
son.
It's easy.
It's
Just
easy.
think about
That's a
it. That's it.
quiz for them, and
Mm,
they'll come up with
it's
the
a
right
easy.
answer.
It's also worth a notice mentioning here that the presence of a third party is not new to our democracy. We did have one
Mhm.
back in the 1960s,
Mhm.
and then again in the 80s,
Mhm.
and then again in the 90s, and then again in the early 2000s. So some people have going on to try to, and then several independents.
Several
So
independents.
and there, go
But
ahead.
also, Tina, there have been several members who've crossed the floor, crossed the political floor,
hmm
and have either sat as independents or have chosen to join the other party.
Yeah.
And let's share the firsts that we know about. Ernest de Cudo was the first Speaker of the House who was of Portuguese descent. Hilda Aiken and Adna Watson were the first women to win seats in the House of Assembly. That victory was achieved in the General Election, pardon me, of 1948. The late Gloria McPhee was the first woman to be appointed as a cabinet position as a minister. And there have been three outstanding women who've served in the position of premier: the Honorable Dame Pamela Gordon for the United Bermuda Party, the Honorable Dame Jennifer Smith, and the Honorable Paula Cox for the Progressive Labor Party. Also, the first politically appointed Attorney General was the late Dame Lois Brown Evans. You may be familiar with her.
Yes, I am very familiar with her. And this day, of course, brings up great reminders of how she valued and took great pride in today.
Mhm.
I was talking with a member of parliament. I said, I asked about, the fashion and
Mhm.
why the hats and why the this. And I said, I remember my mother and Dame Jennifer taking great pride in making sure that they looked absolutely, my mom used to say, bam, box fresh.
Absolutely, and she
Looking,
did.
and it was, you know what it was all related to? The
Mhm.
fact that as women, you were in a place with men.
Men
You
absolutely
have few
dominated.
women dominated. So that was the day that you
At
came out looking your sharpest
sharpest,
and
yes.
so forth. And also as an elected women and appointed
Hmm.
women, that's
And
a
what an
this,
accomplishment.
yeah, it's
That's
an
not to be taken
amazing.
lightly.
It's not as something to take lightly. So I have no problem with all the beautiful members of parliament, members of senate who take the extra time to look
Fabulous,
fabulous today.
absolutely. And our audience as well, you know.
Yeah.
Our audience as well.
We saw the arrival of the president of the Senate, Mrs. Joan Dillis Wright.
And speaking of people looking fabulous, I see our premier's wife looking stunning.
And at this point, I'm looking to see if they've left the House, if there's no constitutional.
Constitutional crisis?
The members of the parliament will be proceeding from Veritas Place on
Mm-hmm.
Court Street,
Mm-hmm.
coming straight down Court Street um, to the lawn, and there Her Excellency will then begin the speech from the throne, which sets out the legislative agenda for the government for
Yes.
this year.
Yes.
Um, Once Her Excellency the Governor proceeds to with removing her headdress, Bishop Dr. Lloyd Duncan, who I did see arriving,
Mm-hmm.
will then rise and begin to recite the prayers.
Yes.
Following the prayer, Her Excellency the Governor will take her seat on the throne. The Premier will approach Her Excellency the Governor and will pass Her Excellency the Governor two signed copies of the speech to be delivered from the throne. He will bow again and retire. Her Excellency the Governor will hand one signed copy to the aide de camp and then reads from the throne seated. At the conclusion of the speech, the aide de camp hands the second signed copy of the speech from the throne to the Excellency the Governor. And then at that point, the ceremony is pretty much over, and we will ask everyone to remain seated until they return to the respective chambers,
Yes.
till the senators return here into the Senate building and the Cabinet building, and the members return to the Sessions House.
Correct. The senators will be led from the cabinet lawn by the president of the Senate, and the members of the House of Assembly will be led by the Deputy Speaker, Mr. Derek
Okay,
Burgess, back to
great.
Veritas Place, where the members of the House of Assembly will meet briefly, and then they will leave, and the premier will pass a motion that the throne speech, which is their agenda for the upcoming year, he will pass the motion that that be passed, and then once that motion is passed, they will adjourn and resume business the following Friday.
Yes, and you'll have the opposition's reply.
Yes,
And of course, this will be the first reply by the new opposition leader, Jerry Richardson.
that's right.
Yeah, that's
That's
right.
right.
That's
That's
right.
right.
After last year was on his retirement, and I hope that he's enjoying his
I
retirement.
hope so.
Cole
Cole
Simons,
Simons,
the
yes.
longtime member of parliament,
Parliament.
Mr. Cole Simons, who
And that's
retired recently.
and that's why Ben, I believe it's Ben Smith, who
Yes.
won that election in October from the seat that was vacated by Mr. Cole Simons. And as you indicate, Mr. Cole Simons has been a long-standing member of Parliament for many years, contributing uh, to Bermuda in that capacity.
So we've been made to understand that the members Black Rod has, well, that's the commissioner
That's the
right there.
commissioner right
That's
there.
not
Yeah,
Black Rod.
no, that's not Black Rod. That's the commissioner.
That's the
He's looking
commission,
splendid in his uniform.
Commissioner Darren Simons. The Black Rod has been dispatched, and they are walking towards the cabinet lawn. So the members of parliament will be arriving, and we will very soon, shortly, have
Mm-hmm.
the reading from the throne.
Mm-hmm.
It will be interesting to see. Look forward to reading and
And
seeing
hearing the
the contents.
contents of that and the government's agenda for the upcoming year. And here comes Black Rod now. He's followed by the sergeant at arms, who is carrying the mace. The sergeant at arms is
Major Allen, I do believe.
Major Allen. Yes, I was trying to remember Major Allen. Major Arnold Allen. I was trying to remember his first name. Her Excellency is being escorted to the throne by the aide de camp. And I see as well our Premier, the Honorable E. David Burt, Bermuda's youngest Premier. He's coming right after the Deputy Speaker, Mr. Derek Burgess.
All right.
So we have
So
the
making their way.
procession of the members of Parliament, the members of the House of Assembly, excuse me. And as we said, Black Rod is escorting them down, followed by
Sergeant
Sergeant
at Arms.
Major Arnold
Mhm.
Allen, Sergeant at Arms, and the acting clerk to the legislature, Mr. Clark Sumner. He's followed by the deputy speaker, who's followed by the by the premier of Bermuda, and the premier is followed by the opposition leader.
And Mr. Clark Sumner, if you, the acting clerk to the legislature, used to be the clerk to the Senate. But on the retirement of Mrs. Shanette Wolf, he has been made the acting clerk to the legislature. Long time, many years.
Mm-hmm.
You will note that we are absent of the speaker.
Mm-hmm.
He is not here today. And the deputy speaker is leading the procession,
Yeah.
the Honorable Derek Burgess.
The
Yeah.
government whip, Mr. Neville Tyrrell. Then there's Minister Robin, Attorney General Kim Simmons, Kathy Simmons, Minister of Health, Kim Wilson, Minister of Public Works, Minister of Education, Jason Hayward,
Minister of National Security as well. We saw Mr. Michael Weeks. We did also see the opposition leader. He was there as well, the Honorable Jerry and Richardson as well.
and other MPs such as
Levita
Levita
Fogo,
Fogo,
the Honorable.
Mr.
Go ahead.
Christopher Famous, Mr. Simmons, Mr. Lister the third, Mr. Curtis Dickinson, Jace Adams, Mr. Anthony Richardson, the Honorable Opposition, Mr. Craig Cannonier, our youth parliamentarians. And so the members of the House have come onto Cabinet grounds and they are taking their seats. So we welcome them here as well.
Lead us o'er the world's tempestuous sea. Guard us, guide us, keep us, feed us, for we have no help but thee, yet possessing every blessing, if our God, our Father be. Our sovereign and everlasting God, with holy reverence we count it a high honor to approach your celestial throne with joy unspeakable. Indeed, our hearts are filled with overflowing gratitude, because, like the psalmist David declared thousands of years ago, you are good and your mercy endureth forever. Lord, collectively, we return thanks to you for watching over our souls during the dark course of the night. Somewhere along the route of our peaceful slumber, you saw fit to touch us with your geovistic hand of love and converse with us with your communicable attribute of mercy, for which we are eternally grateful. Kind Father, your word exhorts us in 1 Timothy 2 1 through 2 that petitions, prayer, intercession, thanksgiving should be made for all people, for kings, for those in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. So, in accordance to your word, we pray for Her Excellency, the Governor. We pray that your divine hand will rest upon her and her household. We pray for our Premier, the Honorable Mr. David Burt. Thank you for our leader. I ask, kind Father, that you will order his steps in your word, dear Lord. Lead him, guide him every day. Send your anointing, Father, I pray. Order his steps in your word. Please order his steps in your word. Equally, I pray for our opposition leader. I pray for courage. I pray for fortitude. My prayer is, Lord, as his years are, so let his strength be. Now, Lord, as all members of both sides of the House will step across the threshold of the House of Parliament, I kindly ask that you would grant all members of Parliament and all members of the Senate a keen awareness of your presence. May they ever be mindful of their vocational mandate, relation to the people whom you have called them to serve. Finally, Lord, your word reminds us that if my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray, seek your face and turn from their sinful ways, then will I hear from heaven, then will I heal the land. Lord, our nation needs a divine visitation from heaven. Visit us. Many, God, living in our country are hurting. Heal us. Now, Lord, I close this prayer by giving you all honor, glory, and praise. It's in Jesus' name we pray. And every heart said, Amen.
Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, 14 months ago, 289 S1 students entered the Berkeley Institute and Cedarbridge Academy as the first of the island's young people to undertake signature learning programs. This education reform milestone was achieved after almost 3 years of work. This school year of 2023 began with students of Francis Patten and Purvis primary schools entering the first parish primary schools, fulfilling the government's promise to make education more equitable, with high quality education accessible to all young people. It takes time to deliver and get right, but the government maintains that education reform is vital for the growth and development of our community. Education is the foundation of any society's success. In this session, the government will continue the work of education reform through the establishment of the transition teams for the next two parish primary schools, earmarked for Elliott Primary and Harrington Sound Primary, and the next signature programme in hospitality and tourism and education services, earmarked for Sandys Secondary Middle School. The legislature will be invited to consider the promised bill to establish an education authority. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, in his 2023 annual report, the former Chief Medical Officer addressed health inequalities in Bermuda, with reference to the four major risk factors common to the leading chronic diseases, namely tobacco use, excessive alcohol use, poor nutrition, and physical inactivity. Dr. Ayola Oyinloye says, in Bermuda, there is a lack of robust population-wide data that links the prevalence of these risk factors with socioeconomic data. There is evidently a requirement for further evidence-based policies to address these risk factors, particularly for the most deprived who are likely to be at greatest risk. The Ministry of Health will undertake the STEPS 2024 Population Health Survey to provide that evidence and establish public health priorities, tackling the trends and magnitude of these risk factors, and leading the fight to prevent chronic, non-communicable diseases. In this session, the legislature will consider the promised bill to support data collection to control medical copays. This critical step on the journey towards universal healthcare will be accompanied by the establishment of the core healthcare services to be included in a universal healthcare benefits package for all residents and a full assessment of the demand and cost to deliver those core services. Access to essential quality health services without suffering financial hardship is key to ensuring improved preventative care. Dr. Oyinloye again sets the stage for where we find ourselves as a society. Socioeconomic disparities are driving unequal social determinants for health, particularly for the most vulnerable groups in society. Whilst the current healthcare system is exacerbating these inequalities, those with the greatest health need appear to have the least access to the healthcare system. Later in his report, Dr. Oyinloye describes the imperative of the moment in healthcare. Bermuda now stands at a crossroads with enormous opportunities for tackling health inequalities. COVID-19 has identified Bermuda's vulnerabilities. The Bermuda Health Strategy 2022 to 2027 and Universal Health Coverage Programme present a chance for Bermuda to reform its healthcare system to become fairer, more effective, and better value for money for all who live in Bermuda. The opportunity is ours to grasp to ensure Bermuda can achieve healthy people in healthy communities. A sad remnant of the pandemic has been the delay in the certification of death of those who succumbed during that period. This has extended to other instances of death, such that families cannot settle their loved ones' affairs in circumstances where a doctor or GP is not prepared to certify the cause of death. To assist these families and others who may suffer such losses, the government will amend the Registration, Births and Deaths Act 1949 to revise and modernise the Form E death certificate and, in appropriate circumstances, make provision for a short form death certificate which will allow for urgent estate matters to be settled. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, amid all that challenges our community, artists and creatives continue to be inspired and contribute to the tapestry of life. Following the launch of the Cultural Heritage Policy for Bermuda, and as part of the consultation in which the Ministry of Youth, Culture and Sport has engaged, the concept of makerspaces has been advanced and is to be embraced by the government as an effective means by which to provide collaborative workspaces within existing buildings. These spaces will incorporate technology and tools to enable artists and creatives to hone their crafts, and will extend to musicians and actors, filmmakers, and other visual artists. Unused government buildings can provide the venue for new artistic offerings and the encouragement of artists of all ages. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, in March this year, Bermuda's first independent living programme was opened. This facility provides the opportunity for a maximum of 2 years of life skills, peer support, and educational planning for those who have aged out of the care of the Director of Child and Family Services on turning 18. To build on the success of this initiative, the Ministry of Social Development and Seniors will extend the services provided to those young people starting at age 17, who, whilst remaining in the care of the Director, will also now benefit from the life skills preparation in this transitional stage where they begin to assume the responsibilities of independent living. In keeping with the promise made in last year's speech from the throne, the Ministry established a multi-risk assessment conference model to address the myriad of issues arising from domestic abuse and family violence. The UK agency Safe Lives provided an invaluable review of the local services, identifying key priorities. The Ministry of Social Development and Seniors will now develop a 5-year strategic plan to combat domestic abuse, mitigate against its familial and societal impacts, and provide the safety of children and families experiencing this trauma. During this session, the legislature will consider amendments to the Adoption of Children Act 2006 to make provisions for greater safeguards against abuses of adoption processes that result in outcomes not in the best interests of children. The Act and the Adoption of Children Regulations 2013 will also be amended to reform the processes by which Bermudians adopt children from overseas, making it less complicated, less frustrating, and less expensive, but always in the best interest of the child. The government's concerted effort to meet the challenges of homelessness will continue in conjunction with those private sector partners who bring to bear their considerable energy and expertise to address the impact of the social dynamic presented by and to those who find themselves without regular shelter. During this session, the government will introduce, for the consideration of the legislature, a homelessness strategy for Bermuda. People with disabilities are often more likely to be impacted by society's inequalities. The 2016 census found that 1,174 of the working age population was unable to work due to disability. Dr. Oyinloye notes in his report, work is an important factor in promoting health, and this could compound existing inequalities due to disability. The Human Rights Act 1981 outlines that disability should not be a reason for disqualification from work if it is possible to modify employment circumstances without causing unreasonable hardship to the employer or prospective employer. In Bermuda, 782 people with a disability receive financial assistance, representing 47% of the total recipients of that aid. Recognizing that most of us were made to modify our homes to continue working during the pandemic, the government will lead as an employer and reform the approach to recruitment to ensure that where a disabled person can perform a role with modifications at home, they can work. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, a global pandemic and now wars have created economic circumstances that defy private sector norms and government intervention. 40-year high global inflation has compounded the inequalities prevalent in our system, creating conditions that make sustaining one's basic needs a daily, weekly, and monthly struggle. The government has used the legislative and policy tools available to assist the people, increasing and expanding child daycare allowance, eliminating duty on staple goods, expanding the reach of financial assistance in instances of sudden hardship, and continuing to reduce the tax burden on the majority of Bermuda's workers and businesses. In spite of the global challenges and their local impact, there has been growth in Bermuda's economy. Employment has increased, international business has expanded, consumer spending, driven by increased household expenditure and exports, is up year over year. The execution of the government's economic development strategy and the continued delivery on the economic recovery plan has laid the foundation for this economic growth. During this session, the government will advance its vision for a thriving city of Hamilton through the creation of a new economic empowerment zone in Southeast Hamilton with amendments to the Economic Development Act. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, the Ministry of Economy and Labour's position paper addressing the challenge of an ageing population and driving economic growth by increasing the working population crystallises the challenge that is shared by several small islands and even larger countries. Shrinking and ageing populations will not be able to support future economies. In this session, the legislature will consider amendments to the Bermuda Immigration and Protection Act 1956 to enact those measures recommended in the Economic Development Strategy. The government will also provide benefits to businesses that retain able-bodied, capable workers beyond age 65. These changes will retain the workforce we have, while other efforts are committed to growing the island's economy, creating more jobs that support an increased working population. Additionally, to ensure that Bermuda's immigration laws are enforced, the Joint Task Force on Immigration Compliance will be renewed as a partnership between the Ministries of Economy and Labour and national security. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, the Bermuda Business Development Agency has operated as a marketing agency and concierge for new business for some years and has a record of promoting the best that Bermuda has to offer the global community. The competition for foreign direct investment is evidenced by the number of jurisdictions creating agencies with such a goal as their single remit. Driven by the board of the BDA and endorsed by the Ministry of Economy and Labour, the organisation will pivot now from a development agency towards an investment promotion agency or IPA. The transition will commence in earnest with a view to its completion to coincide with the new fiscal year 2024-25. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, tax reform has figured prominently in the work undertaken by the Ministry of Finance. During the last session, in line with the recommendations from the Fiscal Responsibility Panel, Bermuda's payroll tax system was made more progressive, resulting in the reduction of payroll taxes for workers to the lowest level in over 30 years. In October 2021, a global agreement was reached to make material changes to the global tax system. It was agreed that a minimum tax would be imposed on the large multilateral enterprises with over 700 million euros of global revenue. Almost 150 countries agreed a framework that would subject such entities to a minimum 15% effective tax rate applied to the profits in every jurisdiction in which they have a corporate footprint. After 2 successful rounds of consultation with the public and particularly with affected industry stakeholders, during this session, the legislature will be invited to consider a historic corporate income tax bill to implement the Global Minimum Tax Agreement in Bermuda. Following passage of the Principal Act, further amendments to the new global minimum tax regime will incorporate specific qualified refundable tax credits to provide incentives for investment into Bermuda's economy from companies who will be subject to the new global minimum tax. These tax credits will provide incentives for international companies in Bermuda to invest in projects that will boost our economy and infrastructure. This certainty in legislation will maintain Bermuda's competitiveness as an international business centre and reinforce the island's hard-earned reputation for transparency and international financial cooperation. The implementation of the global minimum tax in Bermuda will be the most fundamental tax reform in Bermuda's history, and additional revenues that may accrue to the government must be balanced by a reduction in existing taxes and customs duty to ensure that Bermuda remains competitive and retains our thriving international business sector. To that end, the establishment of a new tax reform commission, enabled by an act of the same and passed in the legislature in 2020, will fulfil the government's commitment to examining existing taxes and make recommendations for the changes necessary to reduce the cost of living and the cost of doing business in Bermuda. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, in today's digital age, the use of a bank account is a basic necessity for Bermudians. During this session, and similar to the changes made in other jurisdictions, the government will further advance banking reform by legislating the requirement that licensed banks have a duty to provide access to basic banking services to all residents. Additionally, the legislature will take under consideration the regulations necessary to regulate excessive fees charged for banking services. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, RegTech is the application of emerging technology to improve the way business manage regulatory compliance, monitoring and reporting. In this era of increasing and enhanced compliance around anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing imposed on businesses, charities and professionals, Bermuda can be positioned to participate in developing digital industry. In this session, the legislature will take under consideration a Digital Identity Service Provider Act to lay the foundation for the emergence of a RegTech industry here in Bermuda, as we continue to lead the world in providing a platform for digital innovation in financial services. The legislature recently passed landmark trademark legislation, and to continue the growth in intellectual property, the government will advance amendments to the Patent and Designs Act 1930 to provide the relevant criteria for what constitutes a patent or what is patentable, and set out patent protection in Bermuda extended to 20 years in keeping with industry standards in competitor jurisdictions. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, Bermuda learned that the geographic isolation of the Atlantic Ocean is no barrier to the cyber wars of the 21st century. Government systems were attacked, and it has taken a Herculean effort to restore and recover those systems. Whilst protections were in place and more were contemplated, the events of this September have both accelerated and shifted those plans. The government has mandated an increase in threat detection as well as enhanced security training for public officers. In this session, the legislature will be invited to strike a joint select committee of both houses to inquire into and make recommendations arising from September's cyber attack. Additionally, the legislature will take under consideration a cyber security bill, the draft of which will be amended to reflect recommended statutory strengthening required in the wake of the cyber attack on the Bermuda government. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, human and technology resources continue to be an essential element of keeping Bermuda safe. The scheduled completion of the phase 1 of the island-wide CCTV project in this fourth quarter of 2023 provides the platform for more rigid enforcement of traffic laws, promoting safer driving and safer road use. To address the human resource issues identified within our uniformed services, and to ensure that more Bermudians are able to enter our uniformed services, the Ministry of National Security, in partnership with the Ministry of Education, will implement a Uniformed Services Cadet Training Programme, providing foundational training for young women and men of school age, preparing them for careers in Bermuda's uniformed services. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, the government has taken decisive action to address the cost of living in a deliberate intervention with certain essential goods and services, and has fostered a collective understanding within regulatory agencies and the private sector of the need to balance unchecked profits with community responsibility. Last year, when gasoline prices spiked to all-time highs in many jurisdictions, Bermudians were spared from record prices due to the price freeze for gasoline that was endorsed by the legislature. Whilst the energy and communication sectors are complex, where pricing is influenced by global and local factors, the government will advance amendments to the Regulatory Act 2022, the Electricity Act 2016, and the Electronic Communications Act 2011 to provide for greater public protections in pricing determination and implementation. The Cost of Living Commission will also be tasked with identifying additional essential commodities to be added to the schedule of their act, thereby reducing customs duty that can provide price reductions of those goods to the consumer. In addition to addressing the cost of these services, the government will continue to address the need for affordable housing for Bermudians. The ebbs and flows of the market do not take account of those who need help to start the journey to home ownership or to maintain a stable living environment for themselves and their families. Derelict homes will continue to be repurposed and refurbished, and through the Bermuda Housing Corporation's private sector rental programme and the Home Start programme, more and more Bermudians will be housed in affordable, quality housing. 49 applicants have been approved for mortgages under the government's mortgage guarantee programme with a local bank, adding to the growing number of Bermudians securing homes for the first time with the assistance of the government of Bermuda. Concurrently with this ongoing initiative, the government continues to work with cooperating local banks to reduce mortgage rates for all Bermudian families. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, the promise of digital fare media for public transport has been too long deferred. A reduced reliance on cash payments and the introduction of convenient digital payment methods will allow our public transport interface to match our tourism marketing as a luxury destination. The procurement process is complete, and during this session, the legislature will be invited to consider amendments to the Government Omnibus Fares Regulation 1952 to implement this initiative. As part of a wider discussion on the harmonisation of public service vehicle licensing, the government will address long-standing grievances of various public service vehicle sectors and will usher in a more equitable approach to permitting, licensing and operation, with the goal of ensuring that our residents and visitors have access to transportation services that they expect in 2023, and providing Bermuda's taxi operators their first fare increase in nearly a decade. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, it is a somewhat trite saying that governments are elected to serve the people. Though legislation and policy are the primary levers for serving voters' interests, governments have an obligation to ensure that government services that fall under legislation are delivered well. Service must translate into efficiency, and Bermuda's residents deserve a level and ease of service that matches our claim to jurisdictional sophistication. Some of these services will be improved through a focus on digital transformation of government services. Others will be improved through the streamlining of regulations. The government recognises the key touch points for our citizens and their interactions with their government, and accepts that more is required to deliver more efficient service in key areas. Planning, Though planning laws have been streamlined in recent years, complaints from residents continue, and many are frustrated by their interactions with the department. Immigration. Customer service must be improved, and a focus on this department is expected to increase customer satisfaction through further digitalization of immigration processes. Creation of a single payment portal for all government services, enabling residents to pay for all government services, including customs payments at the airport, online or via their mobile phone. Establishment of one-stop shops for registration, permitting and licensing, which will reduce multiple trips to different government departments. Implementing better use of technology powered by artificial intelligence to ensure that answers are provided to customers who contact the government by phone or email. In recruitment and hiring, the pace of government recruitment frustrates ministers, public service leaders, and applicants alike. Necessary streamlining will be advanced to ensure that funded vacancies are replaced more quickly. Public highways. The government will urgently advance the replacement of its asphalt plants that will accelerate the pace of road paving in Bermuda to ensure that after enduring delays due to island-wide trenching, road users can start to see relief from less than ideal road conditions. Tourism. The Tourism Investment Act 2017 was amended in the last session to provide increased concessions for restaurants, entertainment venues, and tourism attractions. These benefits will only help to improve Bermuda's tourism product if they are used. The government will streamline the process so that our entrepreneurs can invest in new or improved attractions to provide increased amenities for our visitors in line with the continued rebound in Bermuda's tourism industry. The public service has borne the brunt of service delivery in an era of fiscal austerity, a global pandemic, and most recently, a deliberate cyber attack. Public officers have done an exceptional service to Bermuda, and the commitment to delivering even better customer service to Bermuda is a shared one. The government will continue to support the public service as it looks to modernise its processes and improve customer service to the taxpayers of Bermuda. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, modelled on the Audit Act 1990 and its provisions for an audit committee, amendments will be made to the Public Access to Information Act 2010 to create a similar committee appointed by the Governor on the advice of the Premier to enhance the work of the Office of the Information Commissioner. Both acts enshrine the independence of the respective offices, and the former recognises that such a committee is not incongruous with the independent functions of the office. A similar regime will obtain, and public confidence and transparency and accountability can only benefit from this change. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, the vision of former Premier, the Honourable Dame Jennifer Smith, was for Bermuda to strengthen the historic, familial and cultural ties to the Caribbean. This year marks the 20th anniversary of Bermuda's entry into CARICOM as associate members. In this anniversary year, the government will renew the vision of Dame Jennifer, initiating a consultation process leading to full membership in CARICOM. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, the young people of Bermuda inspire confidence in the future and bring a unique energy to life in our community. The Family Centre's Youth Leadership Academy, through its summer programme this year, produced a series of high-quality presentations aimed at improving communities. The presentations were Pump Up the Park, promoting the revamp of Parsons Road Park as a space for the social, physical, and emotional development of teens and young adolescents. Street Harassment in Bermuda, A Culture of Catcalling, a gripping account of personal encounters with demeaning and disrespectful conduct towards young people in the open street. Heart of the City, a proposed film determined to showcase the rich history, personalities, and businesses of Court Street. Each of these presentations proved compelling in their simplicity and thoughtful in their potential positive impact. The government believes that young people invested in Bermuda's future must be supported, as their example will grow the community connectedness that meets the challenge of antisocial behaviour and a history that does not resonate beyond the generation that lived it. Therefore, the students have been connected with the various government departments, and each of the initiatives will be advanced and supported in the coming year. The presentations will be tabled in the legislature to form part of the permanent record and will serve as a reminder of the breadth of talent and passion that exists in our young people. The legacy of the late Martha Dismont is secure and enduring. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, in addition to the bills mentioned before, in this session, the legislature will be invited to consider the following bills: Bermuda Health Council Amendment Bill, Clean Air Amendment Bill, Companies Amendment Bill, Customs Miscellaneous Amendment Bill, Insurance Amendment Bill, Investments Funds Amendment Bill, Landlord and Talent Amendment Bill, Landlord and Tenant Amendment Bill, Motor Taxi and Regulations Amendment Bill, Parliament Amendment Bill, Quango's Amalgamation Bill, Trusts Amendment Bill, Water Resources Amendment Bill, Anti-Doping in Sport Bill. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, this year has been one of transition. Bermuda has bid farewell to seasoned stalwarts on both sides of the aisle. They range from strong Black men who stood in defiance of the status quo at a time when to do so was personally and economically perilous. They include a man who made Bermuda his home and who offered himself in service to the people as a means of giving back to the island that no doubt gave him much. And they include a woman of extreme dignity and grace, whose public service spanned from the classroom to the upper house. Each of them impacted this island, and as we gather here today, we are uplifted by their sacrifice and inspired by their example that no task is too great. Divisions cut deeper in small communities, and so it becomes even more important for us to centre ourselves on those things that will improve the lives of all the people. The government has met the challenge of leadership throughout this young century's most difficult days and remains committed to doing so as we go from strength to strength, recovering, restoring, and growing. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, traditionally at this point, the Governor is invited to add some words of their own. After a series of global events which have had an impact on our economy, society, and way of life over the last 3 years, we have frequently been reminded that Bermuda is not as isolated from the world as maps may suggest. We are fortunate not to be directly exposed to the horrors that we have witnessed in the Middle East in recent weeks or in Ukraine in the last 19 months. The sense of growing global uncertainty is palpable and reinforces the importance of working together to encourage and nurture unity in our society. I am more convinced than ever that resilient, robust, transparent, and accountable institutions of government are essential to achieving our aspirations for Bermuda. I look forward to working with the executive, legislature, judiciary, and across our society over the coming year. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, I declare this session open, and may God guide you in your deliberations.
The reading of the speech from the throne on the occasion of the convening of the legislature. The government has entitled it Serving the People, and certainly big rounds of applause on many things that dealt with the socio issues on the island. We want to acknowledge it was one of the last things that the governor read. We ask that everyone remain in place while the senators and the MPs return to their respective chambers. But Her Excellency mentioned the Family Centers Youth Leadership Academy, and I do believe some of the members are here today. And I really great line there. The government believes that young people invested in Bermuda's future must be supported in their example to grow in the community and connectedness that meets the challenges of antisocial behavior and a history that does not resonate beyond the generation that lived it. Good words. Definitely, we say welcome to the students and the young people part of the Family Centers Youth Leadership. Many things that talked about the great pieces there. But I also want to acknowledge and remembering the service to the community. The back of the program is absolutely beautiful.
Yes,
Go ahead.
Tina. And as you say, Her Excellency the Governor, it's a lovely segue because she spoke of our youth. And here I would like to point out a quote that she had with respect to our elders, those who have served our country well and have sacrificed. And on the back of the program, there's an honor to them. Senator Michelle Simmons, Arthur Hudson, JP, Ottawell Simmons, JP, Stanley Morton, JP, Walter Roberts, JP, Sidney Stallard, JP. These people, we honor them. They have passed, and in their memory, they have been memorialized on the back of the program. And as well, Her Excellency made reference to the work, the sacrifice, and what they did to change things rather than accept the status quo.
Yeah.
And that was lovely.
Yeah.
People who worked hard and with great diligence and dignity. And also, Tina, she made reference to some of the changes that are going to take place throughout the government with regard to the recruitment and hiring process. And I'd like to point out that we have, for the first time, a female who's the head of the public service. We saw when Mrs. Sherry Witter, yes,
Yes. Yeah, that's the back of the program.
that's the back
Yes.
of the
But go
program.
ahead.
Yes,
Sherry Witter is the
Sherry,
first woman to
first
lead
woman to lead
the
the
public
public
service.
service.
Yeah. It's great.
And we saw when she entered the grounds,
Yeah.
leading the permanent secretaries.
There were many applauses throughout the speech. One of the first ones that received applause was the using some of the existing government buildings for creatives. There is, of course, the discussion on we moved over to the platform for digital innovation and financial services, regulations on banks, and then, of course, the global minimum tax and the tax reform, the work of the Tax Reform Commission that started in 2020. But
Another, oh, sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
go-
Another throne speech initiative that received much applause was the fact that the cultural heritage policy, having been written and launched, it's going to continue to advance the challenges of our community for our artists and our creatives.
mhm.
And that is something that's dear and to
To
my
your
heart,
heart. Yes,
especially
absolutely.
because I helped with the writing of the cultural heritage policy. So I'm
Yeah,
pleased to see that that's
yeah,
going to
yeah.
be advanced.
Yes. Well, as you can see, most people have left or are leaving now, and that will conclude our commentary for the 2023 convening of the legislature. Both the House is now in session, as well as the Senate is now in session, and we thank you for joining us for this live coverage. Brought to you by CITV and streamed on multiple platforms. We thank you all for streaming and we thank you for being here.
Yes.
Heather Whalen as
Tina
well. We
Evans.
appreciate you.
Thank you.
And myself, Tina Evans, and the members of the CITV team, we are delighted that you could join us today and hope that you have enjoyed the coverage of the 2023 convening of Bermuda's legislature.